All right. Well, good morning, everybody. It is, I believe, the 19th, April 19th, Tuesday, 2022. It's just around 8 a.m. in the morning, and we're here at the Fairbanks Economic Development Corporation with our guest this morning being Mr. Nolan Klouda, the Executive Director of the Alaska Center for Economic Development, housed at UAA. And our topic today will be an overview of the statewide comprehensive economic development strategy. But before we begin, I would like to go ahead and hand it over to Ms. Brittany Smart, Special Assistant to Mayor Ward at the FNSB, to make the formal introduction and to let you know, give you an even more broad introduction to comprehensive economic strategy. So Ms. Smart, if I may.
Thank you. Yeah, Brittany Smart with Mayor Ward's office at the FNSB. And really, I just wanted to thank Nolan for coming and presenting here. He's also going to be doing presentations in the community and to the Economic Development Commission. Is it next week? Next week. And I just wanted to note the important relationship that we have with UACED and the Alaska State CEDS. As many of you guys on the call know, we've been working internally on our Interior Alaska CEDS over the last year. And with our partnership with Nolan, we are sharing all of the information that we are gathering and making sure that we're using that to help inform the state's efforts as well as it relates to the interior. So I did want to ensure everyone that we're not necessarily looking for an additional round of deep insight into what our community needs. That communication is happening, and we're incredibly grateful that Nolan is coming to the state, to the community, and speaking more to what the state CEDS does and how our local efforts will tie into what they're working on there. So with that, Nolan, thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate all you do, and look forward to continue working with you. And on that note, I actually have to switch meetings, and I just wanted to pop in and say thank you. So my apologies. I've got another 8 a.m., but I will catch you all later, and have a great day.
All right. Thanks, Brittany. All right. Well, then, Mr. Klouda, if you would.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Jomo, for letting me speak today, and Brittany for the introduction. So I'm Nolan Klouda, Director of the University of Alaska Center for Economic Development, here to talk a little bit about the development, or the state's economic development plan, which is a statewide CEDS, the creation of which is underway right now. As Brittany said, there has been already just recently, the Fairbanks North Star Borough CEDS, and there are regional CEDS throughout the state. So I don't necessarily need to tell this audience what a CEDS is, but this is the statewide iteration of an economic development plan, and it does have a complementary relationship with the local CEDS or regional CEDS that occur throughout the state. So like those documents, this is a strategic plan to develop the state economy. There is a public process involved that allows a broad group of stakeholders to weigh in. You need a plan like this for federal funds, and this is especially important when we think about the infrastructure bill coming up, as well as other kinds of funds that are likely to be headed to Alaska. And it's a 5-year plan, of course, that's approved by the Economic Development Administration. So there is a current statewide CEDS that spans the time period from 2017 to 2022, and this CEDS is the update of that, but it's a very comprehensive, if you will, rewrite of it, and really a pretty, I think, aggressive re-envisioning of it. And an important feature of it is that it's rooted to a large degree in the regional CEDS as a bottom-up type of process. So this is something that is really steered by the regional CEDS upward to provide a state level of kind of coordination and sort of a way of making them complementary so that they steer the same direction. Why do a statewide CEDS when you have these regional CEDS? Well, most industries in the state, if we're talking about tourism, if we're talking about defense, if we're talking about oil and gas, if we're talking about any of the major industries, mining, they aren't rooted just in one region of Alaska. They have a statewide footprint, or at least they span multiple regions. The same thing with most infrastructure needs, right? Things like broadband development, a lot of our energy infrastructure that needs updating. These are all things that are bigger than just one region. And so the statewide CEDS helps to provide that kind of coordination between regions. There are also parts of Alaska that do not have a regional CEDS. The Mat-Su Valley does not. The North Slope Borough does not. There are a few other kind of gaps in the state where there isn't a CEDS. The part of the Eastern Interior doesn't have a CEDS. So the statewide CEDS helps to fill some of those gaps too. When folks in any of those regions without one are applying for EDA funding, you actually need to have a recognized CEDS in place in order to receive funds in a lot of cases. And so this helps to fill those gaps too. Of course, we've also got to be talking about an overall plan for statewide growth and recovery. And that's the really important reason why we do a CEDS, and to attract federal investments as well. Something worth mentioning, and I might be able to share this if there's a little bit of time later in the presentation, but we did an analysis of all of the CEDS plans in the whole state, which comes out to about 800 lines of goals, objectives, and strategies. And we used that as an input to help build the statewide CEDS. So it really is, organically rooted in the regional CEDS. And the Fairbanks CEDS that's underway now is a really excellent example of a good CEDS process that I think has some material in it that helped to influence where we are with the CEDS so far, which is not complete. We're trying to use this kind of simple model, this sort of simple way of thinking about the state economy, where you have your base industries that bring new money to the state. You have economic leakage when we buy goods and services outside the state, and you try to minimize leakages and increase the flow of money into Alaska. So our base industries are oil and gas, tourism, mining, seafood, and a few others are the main contributors of that inflow of money. We spend money locally on things like haircuts and restaurants, and we also buy things from out of state. When we order from Amazon or any kind of manufactured good that has to be coming in, and that's money that leaves the state. So when we have opportunities to produce more in state, especially with things like agriculture, we keep more money flowing. And so this is part of the way that we're thinking about the statewide CEDS, to increase those basic industries that bring money to us, and to also provide some opportunities to circulate money within the state when it might have otherwise left, and that creates a lot of economic opportunity. I'd like to say a little bit about the urgency, as I see it, to do some kind of thoughtful economic planning. I think is pretty strong right now. Here's an example. Here's comparing the employment growth between the U.S. and Alaska since about 2015. The U.S. economy overall, right up before the pandemic, was on a pretty steady expansion, employment growth increasing each year, doing pretty well. And as everyone here knows, we were in a recession during that time, especially from about 2015 to 2018 or 19, depending on when you count. For part of that time, Fairbanks was doing better than the state as a whole. A lot of that owes to the bed down of the F-35s, of course. Lots and lots of construction spending happening. But the state overall was losing jobs from 2015 to 2018. And even then, when we started to recover in 2019, we were still pretty stagnant. We weren't really growing too well. Then we all got hit with the recession, with the COVID-induced recession at the same time. Early 2020, everybody around the world had that happen. And then since then, U.S. employment has been more strongly recovering than Alaska employment. You can see that we're sort of waffling. And so this is a real concern, I think, that we have about our state's economic future, how well we recover from the pandemic, but also, the underlying sort of weaknesses in our economy are a real problem, I think, for us that we need to really be thinking about how to address.
If I could, Nolan,
yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to just go ahead and give a moment and just remind everybody, again, this is for all of our mutual benefit. So if you do have any questions, please know I have the chat line up behind Mr. Burgraff. You can go ahead and post questions or comments there, or you can go ahead and raise your hand. Or again, Nolan's an old hand with FEDC in this group. You can always just take yourself right off of mute and go ahead and ask any question you may have.
Yeah, that's a great point. I like questions as we go too. So please jump in.
Well, your intro was a reminder, even to me, of why I asked you to come, which is the importance of the CEDS, these strategic documents. It's not just they're not just idle documents or processes. And again, they're active.
Yeah,
and they're also
absolutely
they're the key
good point.
to resources.
There's an annual update process with the CEDS too, where you can, because 5-year plan, by the time you're at year 4, some of the things you thought were important in year 1 aren't, and there's a bunch of things you didn't think about back then. So you do have to be updating it, and that is part of this process, an important part of this process.
Thank you.
So mentioning that our kind of economic challenges compared to the rest of the U.S. has led to this trend that we see, where we've really looked at, I think it's about 9 years of consecutive population outmigration, losing people, more people leaving the state than coming. And some of, a lot of you, this isn't necessarily news for everyone, but this is a big problem that we have that's sort of a sign of Alaska not having as much opportunity as the rest of the country. And what that looks like, here's the in-migration versus out-migration. It's not that everybody's rushing for the exits in Alaska. Like that's sometimes the popular image that you get is that there's this surge of people leaving. And you can see that the number of people leaving isn't necessarily increasing. It's just that the number of people that the number of people arriving has fallen over the last few years, and so that there's always more people leaving than arriving in Alaska. And this is sort of like a slow thing that happens, but it leaves us with a smaller workforce. It leaves us with smaller, with fewer customers if we're a business. It leaves us with less opportunities for our kids that might want to live, that we might want to have, live in Alaska in the future and find a good, prosperous future here. So this is certainly not something that's a positive trend.
Well, it's interesting that it seems that the population outflow, net migration out, preceded COVID. It even seems to have preceded the collapse in the price of oil.
Oh, that's absolutely true. It's a good point, Jomo. We actually, employment-wise, Alaska was doing pretty good until about 2015, but you can see that we were actually losing people in a few years before that, and some of that was the result of these years here where you see like 2009, 2010, 2011. What was going on there was that the U.S. economy was crappy and Alaska's economy was doing well, right? So it was so we sort of traded places. But when Alaska's doing well and the U.S. overall is doing poorly, that encourages people to move to Alaska, and so we see those have shifted.
Thank you.
So there is of course an important public process behind the CEDS, and something that actually should have mentioned up front, that to be clear about who owns the CEDS process is the State Department of Commerce, DCCD, is the overall driver of the statewide CEDS plan. This is their plan. Center for Economic Development is working for them in a contractual capacity. We have a lot of we did this prior CEDS, so we have a lot of the knowledge about the process. And so that's what our relationship is. So the commissioner's office, Commissioner Julie Sandy, her team is leading the CEDS process with us on contract, and then also the governor's office, John Springsteen from the Alaska Development Team is heavily involved in the CEDS process too. So like the Fairbanks CEDS process that that many of you probably participated in, there's a kind of multifaceted way of getting public input. There's a strategy committee that is made up of Brittany Smart serves on it, and a bunch of the industry associations, the regional economic development organizations, workforce development entities, and a bunch of others. A couple of state legislators on there too. There's a lot of background research that goes into this. We have some analysis on all the major industries in Alaska and the economy overall. We're doing the community and local outreach, forums like this throughout the state. I'll also be up in Fairbanks actually a week from today to meet with the chamber and with the Economic Development Commission. Lots of industry outreach, and then of course the analysis of the regional plans themselves, the Fairbanks CEDS, Anchorage CEDS, Southeast CEDS, and so forth that have gone into it.
Well, actually, Nolan, if I may stop you for just one moment. So as Brittany noted, our CEDS has been in production now for over a year. And in fact, my understanding is that the draft will be available for public release and review and comment at the top of May. What is the timeline for the statewide CEDS? Oh, by the way, I have reached out to Brittany and the contractor who is helping us with our local CEDS to see if they might be our presenter on May 3rd, again, as part of the rollout, public rollout of the draft. So I'm hopeful for that. But what is the timeline for the creation of the statewide CEDS, and where would you say we are in that process?
Yeah. So good question. I do have a slide about the timeline, and I will. So I can go into a little more detail in a moment. But
I'm sorry. I got ahead of you.
Oh yeah, no worries. This process is a very fast and furious one. We've been working on it since January. The public outreach and the regional outreach especially is really concentrated during the months of April and May. So we're very thick in the swing of it right now. So later today, I've got a session with the Norton Sound region. Tomorrow, our strategy committee is meeting again, meeting with Kodiak. Also, a lot of these virtual meetings as well as some in-person stuff. So that's the public outreach stuff. The draft will be done in June, and then the public comment process is going to take place July, and then the document will be finalized and completed. It has to be submitted to EDA September 30th, but should be ready well in advance of that by about late August or so.
Thank you.
So what I also wanted to do, though, give a little bit of substance to this discussion is, and this is something where I really welcome comments, questions, input. But I wanted to I think one of the things that I've learned in the course of doing these kinds of plans is that there's a point where open-ended feedback of like these broad questions is really useful, and there's a point where we need to sort of put ideas in front of folks to respond to, and then we can redevelop them, reconfigure, and have this sort of iterative process of developing goals. And so what I'm going to share is we've developed kind of these 6 main pillars to the statewide CEDS, and I'm gonna walk through these, and we have some. These are preliminary, of course, and then we also have some objectives within those goals that are, of course, also preliminary, and they are incomplete. There's material that that isn't in there yet because we don't have all of the outreach done, and so that's part of our process. So what I'm going to share with you is not complete. It is not fully formed yet, but it is going to give you a bit of a shape for where we're going with this process. So we've got these six areas. Strengthening Alaska's economic engines. These are our large legacy industries. Cultivating and growing emerging sectors. So these are the industries that have promise and potential for growth, but might be small right now. The support for really the small business climate, and for the entrepreneurial ecosystem for the current small businesses as well as startups. Economic foundations, which relates a lot to infrastructure, quality of life, cost of living elements. Workforce and human capital, we all know that's a problem. And then, of course, resiliency as well, which is a requirement of the CEDS, but also something that we've seen. We know that we have to be resistant to external shocks and unforeseen events, right? So I'll walk you through each of these 6 and show you where our current thinking is. And I do welcome, as I show these, I do definitely welcome comments and questions too. So I'd encourage folks to chime in.
Okay, because we actually do have a question in the chat box, which is, how might you want to receive input, regarding this? And again, you mentioned you'll do a little bit of a deeper dive in the timeline when the public comment periods are.
Yeah. So there's a couple ways. One is you can always. One is we have a survey, and I'll share the survey information. And the survey is it's a business and stakeholder survey. So it has some multiple choice stuff in it. It doesn't take too long to complete, but there's also some open-ended sections, so you can put like top priorities and stuff like that into it. But also you can connect with me directly, and that's certainly one way to share input. You can also we're working closely with Brittany at the borough, and then also be in regular contact with Jomo. So any of those folks, if you have comments to get to them that they can ferry to me, that's also another possibility too. But also meetings like this, this is a great time to blurt out your concerns too. So there's a few ways. There'll also be a public comment period. That's another way to comment on what's there when it's in draft form. So a couple different ways. Strengthening Alaska's economic engines. So here are the major ones that we've developed, so that we've got so far. The themes to this that we've got so far. These themes are going to be the kind of the objectives. And then each objective is broken out into the action strategies that are, the more concrete steps. So ensuring a predictable, stable and predictable regulatory permitting and tax structure for development of natural resources. Developing Alaska's natural gas for both in-state and export markets. I know that getting some kind of a good supply of natural gas is a priority for Fairbanks. And you already have some gas coming in, some gas infrastructure, but I think that there's a lot more of Alaska that could benefit from natural gas than is currently getting it, and that's something that's a priority. Also, new public and private investment for defense sector. The prior statewide CEDS was probably a bit weak on military and defense issues. I've seen statewide that Fairbanks does the heavy lifting when it comes to anchoring and supporting our defense sector in Alaska. And it often gets ignored by the rest of the state, including here in Anchorage, where defense is also a big thing in Anchorage. But it gets sort of lost compared to some of the other industries, and I think that's been a real weak spot, because military is a huge driver for our economy. I don't have to tell Fairbanks that, but statewide as well as locally in the interior. Revitalizing the forest products industry. Southeast Alaska, of course, but also, I know there's forestry resources that are being used to some degree in the interior. Some of our advantages in air cargo, developing more opportunities there, including some ancillary opportunities for Fairbanks Airport. Yeah, mining. I see the question about mining. We have I think a theme that's not listed here. Well, one is on permitting, regulatory, and tax structure. That's one. And then on emerging industries, I'll get to in a second. We talk about critical minerals too. And there's also, I think I didn't list it here, but access roads, like the kind of roads that ADA uses to open up areas for resource development, is another one too. So mining something we certainly wouldn't leave behind. But the mining industry folks have really put a lot of emphasis on that first point there about a predictable regulatory permitting, especially, and tax structure. Seafood industry as well, not so much a thing in the interior, although there are, of course, plenty of permit holders in the interior. But and then of course developing Alaska, continuing to develop Alaska for as a world-class visitor destination, including catering to some of the independent travelers as well as the cruise passengers too. Cultivating emerging sectors these are small industries, currently small, but that have a lot of growth potential. The mariculture production, the farming of oysters and kelp and aquatic plants for markets, a big thing in a lot of the coastal communities. Developing an in-state aerospace sector, and this includes things like unmanned aircraft as well as space launches. Agricultural output and value. Agriculture in Alaska has been on a pretty strong growth trend, both for, because of things like farmers markets growing for local customers, as well as for export markets when we're talking about things like peonies, right, that have a pretty high value for world markets. So there's a lot of good potential to continue growing agriculture. The maritime industrial sector, servicing of boats and ships and building of boats and ships. Capacity of manufacturers. Some of you probably know the Alaska MEP Center, Alyssa Rodriguez, but they provide a lot of assistance to manufacturers, and I think we've got some interesting stuff going on for manufacturers, both food manufacturers as well as various kinds of equipment, metal fabrication, outdoor products, a lot of cool stuff happening there. Manufacturers also, during the early stages of the pandemic, were making masks and hand sanitizer, things like that. It ended up being a source of strength for us. Processing of critical minerals, as well as the development of critical minerals, is another one. Even in some case, there's this big concern now, globally, where we get our rare earth elements from China, where we get a lot of our nickel that's used in just about every battery for every electronic device. A ton of that nickel comes from Russia. We would like to be able to produce some of those either in country or at least from friendly countries. And so there's actually an opportunity in Southeast Alaska, for instance, to process rare earth elements that are mined in Canada or elsewhere, but they can be processed in Alaska. But I'm more excited about what critical minerals we could develop in state. We're talking about things like cobalt is up in the Ambler mining district. Other kinds of critical minerals, as well as rare earth, including rare earth elements, that can be developed in state. There's a lot of strong growth potential around those resources. Of course, we have coal in state, powerful energy resource as well.
So working backwards, if I may, just for a second, Nolan, just so everyone knows, I have reached out. Our guest next week will actually be the new director of the state's geologic survey to give us an update and an introduction so we can meet him. And as far as manufacturers, FEDC recently entered a partnership with Alaska MEP. And thank you for bringing Miss Alyssa up, because I think I may go ahead and ask her if she can go ahead and give us a presentation as well. Manufacturing is an underappreciated enterprise in Alaska and here in the interior. I can just tell you that we have lots of manufacturers. It's just we don't match that profile, that kind of stereotypical profile of the large black and white, factory pumping out Fords. Yeah.
Hey, Jomo and Nolan, if I could, I was going to wait until maybe later on, and if it's more appropriate down near number 4, number 6, let me know. But when we're talking about manufacturing, Joe Usabelli Sr.'s comments always run through my mind when he asked the question, why don't we have steel manufacturing in Alaska? And serving in the legislature, I know the lobbyists will say we're too far away from markets, which is BS, because we're closer to the West Coast than Japan and China are. We just don't have a mindset for doing raw material manufacturing in Alaska. And then they'll say the cost of energy is so high, and yet we say that we're an energy giant. But if we can't figure out how to incentivize affordable energy to manufacture stuff, then we're fooling ourselves. We have $5 billion of raw material that go to enrich other people's communities, whether it's in the lower 48 or other countries. And we haven't figured out that $5 billion or $4.5 billion to $5 billion can translate into a lot of economic activity in Alaska. Is the CEDS going to address these fundamentals and maybe show a map for, okay, if we want to get there, here's the sacrifice it might take, here's the steps we got to take, here's the inducements that perhaps should be considered, here's the partnerships that need to align, this type of thinking. Are you working on this at all?
Yes, I think that kind of industrial sorts of development that we can take on that benefit from being close to some of our natural resources. That is an important piece here. I think we could probably flesh that out a little more specifically. So I think your comment is a good one. I think that the challenge is and you mentioned it, and I'd push back a little bit and say that the cost of and there's always been this crazy paradox to Alaska that yes, we produce massive amounts of energy, in various forms that we sell to the lower 48 or to the rest of the world, and yet we have high cost of power here, and that always seems like something we should be able to solve, and it probably is, and yet we haven't really. And so a lot of the kinds of big industrial processing, you're talking about like steel production, are very, 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 very energy hungry, and they need power costs that are just stupid cheap. And we have never quite gotten to where we can deliver that. And reasons for that, are many. But it is a problem. I would say though that we can't turn our back on processing. I mean, I think that you look at we do have obviously some refining that happens in Alaska, not maybe as much as we used to, but there is some refining of fuel, right? I think that we also need to be thinking hard about processing of ores and other materials too, where if we're, instead of shipping out raw ore, what about more processed, going down the line for a more finished product, I think that there are a lot of opportunities to push the envelope on that. But we do have to work on the cost of energy, and that's also in the CEDS too. Is the cost of energy for both residential and for industrial processes. But when we have, generally speaking, Alaska's power costs are not necessarily the highest in the country overall because of Hawaii, but we're second highest generally. And some communities in Alaska, blow Hawaii away, are the most expensive in the country when it comes to power, right? And so that's always going to be a problem. And then the other factor is workforce, right? Is that workforce is increasingly a problem for Alaska. Not a new problem, but a worsening problem, probably.
Right. But, and I appreciate all that you said, but I've never found yet a document produced by the state or even by UAA's, your think tank or anything that outline, okay, if we want to get from here to where other resource-rich states are, then these are the steps that we need to take. And here are the possible options that we have to utilize. But instead, we always draw it within our paradigm. We always say, here's what traditionally has happened. And so here, therefore, this is what always will happen. We've never looked at other sovereigns, oil sovereigns, and said, here's how they make it affordable. We just dismiss it and say, we can't do it because we're America. Instead of saying, here's our options, and here's how we might utilize the permanent fund, or here's how we might, translate the dividend, or any number of things, so that we can have a good dialogue in the state and get everything on the table so that we can constructively talk facts and figures and opportunities versus this is the way it's always been done. And I think CEDS is a great launching point for that conversation. But I'll defer now. Thanks.
Yeah. I think those are all really important points. And I didn't. Looks like I didn't mention it in that last slide, but we've also had some thoughts around kind of different alternative uses for some of Alaska's natural resources that might be a little bit in the direction of what you're thinking. So for example, there's a big national push around hydrogen as a fuel source, right? Well, hydrogen, has to be produced from some other energy source, right? It's more of a fuel storage medium than it is like just a fuel source that we can extract as a natural resource, right? So, but hydrogen can be created from natural gas. And also natural gas can be used to produce ammonia, which is also a good, nice liquid way of transporting and storing hydrogen too. And so there have been some proposals to develop, various kinds of proposals recently to develop, including some that might benefit from federal investment, to develop the North Slope as a hydrogen hub, right? We've struggled to get a gas line developed, may still happen, could still happen regardless of whether we do something else with the gas too, but to use some of our resources to produce hydrogen fuel, that can be used, it's going to be used for, I think probably in the years ahead for vehicles, especially for cargo vehicles, for ships and so on. So, can we do some of those kind of creative things? Can we also, the nice thing about the ammonia processing is that we could actually, in principle, we could ship ammonia through our existing pipeline, which has an offtake, in North Pole, right? And also, and all the way, and then of course, Valdez. So we could use, and then the ammonia could be reconverted into hydrogen as a fuel source too. So I think that there's stuff like that, that's going to be reflected in the CEDS, that might be kind of partly in line with what you're thinking. But I totally agree that there is a paradigm that does need to be rethought. There's also been various ideas over the years for petrochemicals, which is which instead of just filling tankers with LNG, if we got to that point and sending it off, well, what if we did some more processing here to develop there's a whole ton of products like fertilizers and various kinds of chemicals that need to be produced out of natural gas. What if we did that too? We used to have the Agrium plant down in Nikiski. What if we developed more of a petrochemical industry in the state too? I think that things like that could be really, really important.
I did just send a letter last week to one of our utility tops describing some of these leakages and what could be done if we did things a little bit differently. Leveraging something like a Susitna dam, if properly, at least from the analysis, if properly configured, financed, and funded, that they could spin off 5-cent power for 100 years and all the things that you could do with 5-cent power. And that was that integrated actually the transmission connections that actually would allow those electrons to flow.
Yeah, that's a good point. The Watana Dam is a great example, and really like what would make the Watana, there's kind of a chicken and egg thing there too, because what would make the Watana Dam more feasible instead of just putting it on the backs of the rail belt ratepayers would be if there was an industrial development that would use bulk power, right? That would then help to cover some of those costs and then help to make power cheaper for all of us on the rail belt, right? Like that would be something beneficial too.
Thank you.
And what better source than maybe steel manufacturing? Because going back to Yusabelli's comment, it's they got resources down in the Anchorage Bowl area that are just waiting, and it's cocoa coal, I guess, whatever it might be. But certainly we can start developing some of these resources instead of like Red Dog shipping everything out to as far away as Iceland, Australia, Canada, wherever the smelters might be at that moment. That would be an anchor tenant for projects such as what Watana would provide.
Yeah.
Well, and Dr. Metz has noted again regional and local limestone deposits that again with turning limestone into concrete is an energy intensive process. But again, if you have the energy, we have the limestone. We have this mineralization. I'm sorry, Nolan. Please carry on. But again, great comments, great discussion, guys.
Good, and I am taking notes as we go too. So if you hear me typing, very good comments. Another one is about attracting remote workers, and this is something where we're increasingly in a world where you work and where you live don't need to be in the same place, right? I'm actually, I'm actually sitting in my my home office right now, right? So I think that opportunity to attract remote workers to live in Alaska, which might also mean existing or current Alaskans or people who've moved away from Alaska that want to live here, but didn't find the job that they wanted in state. Now we don't have to think about that or worry about that as much. So attracting remote workers to Alaska through various kinds of marketing efforts and other potential inducements down the road is another thing we can do. Talking about reversing some of that outmigration trend. And then, of course, Alaska is a global center for energy innovation. Alaska's got a lot of interesting pilot projects, a lot of innovative research, a lot of microgrids. Up at UAF, we work a lot with the Alaska Center for Energy and Power. We have a close partnership with them to be able to spin off some of what we've learned in energy production. For other kinds of places around the world, other rural or remote places is something really big. Of course, there's the micro reactor, that's probably going into Fort Eielson or Eielson AFB, in the years ahead. So these are all things that we can try to leverage, to build more of an industry, I think. The business climate and the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So a couple of themes here that we've got: enhancing the digital competencies of Alaska's businesses and entrepreneurs, including for things like e-commerce, but also a lot of Alaska, is going to see the build out of faster broadband in the years ahead. And so how do you use that? How do you leverage that? Including in some rural communities where they haven't had good internet access, and now they will. And how can you use that to create entrepreneurial opportunities? The increasing the number of investable startup companies based in Alaska. We've got our efforts like Alaska Startup Week. There's active efforts by UAA and UAF both to cultivate more startups. Stuff I know that FEDC is involved in too. Trying to get more. There's been the Alaska Angel Conference. Angel investors. So trying to get more of those potentially scalable types of startups. Ensuring adequate access to capital for Alaska small business and entrepreneurs. I think a lot of businesses have really gotten battered by COVID, and financing in a lot of cases is hard when your balance sheet looks bad because of a 2-year pandemic. Generally speaking, a supportive environment for startup companies, for encouraging people to start businesses, and also promoting Alaska's advantages as a place to do business, to retain businesses here and to attract businesses here that might have a reason for wanting to be in Alaska are pretty important things. So building and updating economic foundations in Alaska. So we've struggled with kind of what to call this category exactly, but this is where we're talking about, our economy always depends on these sort of foundations that sometimes they're not the most exciting things, but they're critically important. And I think that I don't have to tell you guys this, but of course broadband is one. That's one where I think our urban communities have okay broadband, could be better. But a lot of the state is still pretty slow, and even some of our urban communities are not keeping up with national averages when it comes to broadband speed. So this is something this is important. Lots of federal money coming, but the availability of childcare is been a priority by the Alaska Chamber of Commerce. To ensure this is something that keeps people out of the workforce who want to work, right? Because they need to care for their kids. I've got 2 kids myself, and I can attest to how hard it is when you don't have a childcare option, how hard it is to actually work. The Alaska Marine Highway System, big priority, of course, for coastal communities. Bypass mail system, preserving that, big priority for rural communities off the road system. Supply of housing. I know Fairbanks has been actually trying to push for some innovative policies to increase housing, especially with the influx of service personnel coming. Housing's a problem everywhere in Alaska. There's not a community that I've been to or worked with where there isn't a problem with housing. The smallest rural village all the way to our largest cities, to our Fairbanks, Anchorage, Juneau, everything in between. There's not enough housing. There's not enough housing that's affordable. There's not enough housing that's available when it's needed. This is a big problem, and it is, maybe, in my opinion, it might be one of our bigger economic constraints, or maybe one of our 2 or 3 biggest economic constraints is housing, because it prevents workers from moving to Alaska. It encourages people to leave Alaska. It's all around a big challenge. Reducing the cost of energy for industrial and residential use, and this is where we get into some of the things that Doug was talking about too. Supplying lower cost power that opens up a lot of industrial opportunities, as well as lowering our residential power costs. And then improving road access between communities throughout the state as well, wherever that can be done in a feasible way that meets some cost benefit kind of parameters. Workforce and human capital. This one is a little underdeveloped, not because it isn't important, but because we haven't done all of the inputs yet. We still have a lot of outreach and fact finding to do, especially with workforce development organizations. But where we are so far with it is one, there's a big urgent priority is that we're going to receive the big influx of infrastructure money, in the next 5 years, and we don't have the workers to do it, right? We're going to need a couple thousand workers. We don't really even have the ability to even for the jobs that are being recruited right now, we don't have enough workers necessarily to fill them, right? So this is going to be something that we're going to have to worry about. I see the comment, road to resources. I didn't have it in the slide, but on the first one, especially about our economic engines, there is an objective about roads to access natural resource development sites, so like the Ambler Mining District, the West Houston Access Project, and a few others like that. So another workforce development one is orienting, having workforce development plans that align with some of the industry development strategies too, both the emerging and the economic engines or existing legacy industries is something, and then also preparing the workforce for kind of the energy transition. If there's a movement towards things like electric vehicles and hydrogen powered vehicles, and also electrified aircraft, electrified ships and boats, this kind of energy transition that's happening. There's also a lot of job needs that are going to go with that, and certain jobs that may eventually sort of fade away that have been really lucrative, like being a diesel mechanic. Being a diesel mechanic is still a good job right now, right? But will it be in 10 years, 20 years? We don't necessarily know, right? So managing
We do have at least a few good examples of the one in the middle, workforce development plan centered around the needs of industry. Comes to mind, the growth of the nursing program within state would be a great example. Again, healthcare was an emerging opportunity, and we wanted to make sure Alaskans were trained to capitalize. Also, the development of the engineering buildings at both UAA and UAF. Again, recognizing the need for engineers, that kind of skilled worker. So we do have we have some historical basis for those.
Oh, sure, good. Yeah, those are both good, really good examples. There's new engineering schools at both UAA and UAF. Very hungry for engineers. Alaska is even now. Nursing, always need more nurses. I think that, and there's been some effort. This isn't entirely new. The kind of alignment of workforce development plans with kind of economic, sector-based plans. But I think that there's a need to kind of renew it and to do more of it. Basically, I think that the world of economic development, the world of workforce development, need to move more hand in hand than they currently do. I think, because I think that the economic development world understands more of the employer needs. And the workforce development world they get some of that too, but they're often a little more driven by the individual needs or wants of workers. And so somewhere in between, there's a really productive space, where the supply of workers and the demand of workers can get a little bit closer together, I think. And here's something I'd like to point out to folks. The labor force has been totally nuts lately. We've all been hearing about and different theories. Why is it so hard to find workers? Why is it so hard to find workers? Well, something interesting here in Alaska is that our workforce participation rate, it's been in like kind of a longer slide over the last several years. Some of this is due to aging. Some of it is due to people leaving the workforce for other reasons. It had been in a slump and then fell sharply during the pandemic. But Alaska's labor force participation rate is actually climbing now, and it's actually been climbing pretty steeply, so that we actually have a higher percentage of our population participating in the workforce now than we did right before the pandemic. So that's something interesting too, that there aren't as many slack workers or people who are could work but aren't. There isn't as much of that in our workforce as sometimes it's tempting to think. Doesn't mean that there aren't some. But and our workforce participation rate could be, considerably higher, going back up to these levels. But it's still part of the landscape that's worth keeping in mind. Is that there just aren't necessarily enough bodies for all the jobs that we have. So we need to make efficient use of what we have as well. And we've lost people too, right? So that's shrunk our workforce. Last up is resiliency, to build a resilient state economy. This is something that's a requirement for EDA, but also something we've seen the last few years. How do we prepare ourselves and our state for these kinds of shocks that are unforeseen, that come from external types of events? Sometimes it's natural disasters, earthquakes, floods, whatever that might be. Sometimes in some places it's fisheries disasters, when the salmon don't come. But of course, the big one is the pandemic, which has had all these edge of the seat type of moments where we think it's over and then it's not. And what do we do with that? So some proactive planning around like, the way I think about it is like, if I could go back in time 2-3 years, right before the pandemic, if I knew it was coming, what would I actually have done to prepare for it? And some of it is organizing, response groups, figuring out what resources are there, figuring out some roles and responsibilities so that you can have an orderly process of getting relief to businesses, funneling information to those that need it, getting in front of policymakers as needed to figure out solutions and so forth. So those are the main objectives. I've shared the slides with Jomo, so I think is going to be able to send this out to everybody. But our process, I don't want to already kind of went over this, but really, the summer is when we do our 30-day comment period. Right now, April, May is really intensive public input. So this is where there's where the goals and objectives are the most flexible and moldable as we go along. We're continue to take in input, add them to what we've got, and then put out the next version. And then lastly, we do have a survey. This QR code leads to it. I would love to have some responses. It's a few-minute survey. I've also put the link in the chat. The survey really helps us gather input from a broad swath. So for those of you that have groups of contacts or of businesses or members that you want to get input from, you want to make sure that their voice is heard in the statewide CEDS process, that's the survey you can share with anyone. So with that, I don't know if there are any other questions, but I'd happily hear any other comments or questions that folks may have.
All right, thanks a million, Nolan. And I guess right off the bat, I'll go ahead and try to capture that link. I'm sorry that Lisa Herbert had to leave just a little bit early before you could flash that stuff up, because she's assisting the chamber in their transition. They need a new president CEO, and she stepped into the breach, but the chamber can make sure that it can reach that 600 plus members to be able to take that survey and help boost your input from the community. I would open it up, or just open the floor for questions and comments.
Yeah, and I see a couple in the chat here too. Also, I see Ramsey put in a point about IARPC, which is which I don't know what it stands for, but it's related to Arctic research. I think that we haven't had any specific input from them, although we do have a lot of, like, within the university system input about research and where research aligns with some of the economic needs. But are there specific points that you would mention? Sorry, Rami?
Well, I suppose it's the entire presentation is somewhat relevant. The time frame and the dollars that not just the institutions in Alaska, but all the federal agencies and the institutions they're working with in the United States as well as globally, and paying attention to what's going on in the Arctic, climate change, but also socially, economically, and all the impacts on the ways of living across the Arctic, which of course has a lot to do with Fairbanks. Considering the global implications of where Alaska is for the United States and what's going on with Russia and the Ukraine and all the other things, these conversations are active amongst all those scientists and those engineers. These are individuals that aren't necessarily so practiced at having the social, grounding of everything, or some of the policy history and everything. So there's been a clear gap in a lot of those conversations with the same conversations that a lot of these other groups and agencies are trying to have as well. So any effort to try to facilitate any of those projects and those efforts, those commitments moving forward, I think would be better for everybody involved. Sure.
Yeah, some very good points. Very good points. I think the resiliency part of it, I think is where one section where we need to be thinking a bit about impacts due to climate change, which have heavy impacts on Arctic communities, obviously, among other things. But I think there's a very rich research agenda there that I can't say that I'm deeply familiar with, but I think that it is relevant here. The security situation, if I was Russia right now, I would be very concerned about the Bering Straits as a choke point, which means that the US should be very concerned about the Bering Straits as a critical route for Russia. I think the Arctic is very much alive right now.
Well, Mr. Burgraff?
Well, the situation in the Ukraine and of course with the Russians now is putting a new dimension to our lives here. And we are being impacted and we will be impacted. They have no regard for the environment. We have made a real attempt to do things properly and it environmentally sound better. What really bothers me with the present administration, you know, I realize we want to get on a different type of energy system, but it's not going to be done overnight. It's good to have goals set up, but we need gas, we need petroleum. We have the resources up here, and we are being totally ignored by the Biden administration as far as being able to develop our oil and our gas resources. There is a need for worldwide natural gas. I realize we want to try to develop other sources for energy, but we need to look at the present, and we're not doing it now, I feel.
Okay. I tend to be slightly more generous, simply to note that there is inconsistency between the goals as set as current by the administration.
Yeah, well, you may be a little more tactful than I am, but I feel pretty fervently about what's happening in this country and in the world. And if we're going to live in a world where we have a free society, we're going to have to start doing something about it to make ourselves more independent and be able to help out those areas. We're going to have a worldwide crisis as far as starvation. The Ukraine, I'm not sure what's going to happen there, but that's been the breadbasket for food resources for many nations, and they're not going to have that. And I don't see how we're going to do it. One other thing, for agriculture, they need fertilizer, and the Ukraine had produced a lot of fertilizer, and I just don't see our country moving ahead the way it should with this crisis that we have on our hands right now.
Sure. Yeah, good. Yeah, important points there. I'd agree. And I think that a lot of that is going to be reflected, I think, about producing natural resources in a responsible way in Alaska, means that we don't have to the planet doesn't have to suffer from some of the more irresponsible practices elsewhere that support autocratic regimes like Vladimir Putin. I see a comment, I think, from Rick. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, hand up, Mr. Soley.
Oh, thank you. Well, I would underscore what Roger Burgraff said as far as the fact that Alaska does it right, and so I would just support your bullet about a predictable and robust permitting regime. That is what the resource development industry needs. Nolan, I also I work for an advanced exploration stage gold project, Alive and Good. And it would use 50 megawatts of power were we to construct it. So it would be a large electric user. I also sit on the Golden Valley Board of Directors for GVEA, the Golden Valley Electric. I would just counsel you as you look at these big ideas like Susitna, it would be a wonderful generator for our state. But be careful to assume, like you were even mentioning, that you'd have some project that would come and kind of take the base load of it. So it's almost as if we need that to be the big grant funded project for the state, and then you would potentially see things develop. But it's a challenge to provide cost-effective electricity in the state currently.
Sure. Yeah, and as I understand it, I'm certainly not a mining industry expert, but I think that Fort Knox has benefited a lot by being part of the grid, right? Instead of having to produce its own power. I think that that's probably helped
Yes.
the economics of it a lot, right?
Yeah, the ratepayers in Fairbanks have benefited from Fort Knox, as has the community from the economic impacts as well. And so it's really the challenge is to be able to provide that lower cost base load power, but to meet these renewable goals that we have. GVEA has goals for lowering our carbon emission, and they're real goals we're striving to attain. And so that all fits into the mix, and I guess we have to be realistic. And when we're not, it doesn't help us achieve goals. So work on that permitting regime that could have a whole bunch of bullets under it, because for Alaska to be able to develop, we have to be able to count on permits. You can look at Bristol Bay, you can look at the Ambler Road, two examples of a permitting system where things have apparently gone off the rails, and investors need to be able to rely on the system.
Right. Yeah, where it's one thing to have high standards, but it's another thing to have a permitting process that you enter and put huge costs into without having a clue what the outcome's going to be because of lawsuits or kind of other kinds of project vetoes that you can't foresee.
Exactly. Thanks.
All right. So as a final reminder, well, I guess no, before I do that, Nolan, thank you so much. Again, sorry we couldn't get on your docket for next week for a sit down and in person with the group. But yeah, thank you for doing an advanced presentation for us today. It's very much appreciated. And again, it's great to see the great work that's being done. It's nice to see the timeline for when it's being done so that we as the public can know how and when to participate. So much appreciated. Just for everyone, again, Nolan did post his email address within the chat box, but know that you can always Google Alaska CED, and it'll take you to their website where you'll find a whole bunch of great resources in addition. Nolan also did a lot of great work at Jim's urging regarding the military, things like a supply chain study. Characterization of the military presence and its impact on both our local and statewide economy, and that's just one of many great offerings and activities that are again provided to the state and us by Nolan and his team. So thank you so much. Again, I have reached out. I see Brittany has dropped off, but again, I have reached out. We've done the statewide. Normally we would do this in the other direction, which is we go local then state, but I wanted to grab Nolan while I could. So again, I have reached out to Miss Shelley Wade with Ag New Beck, the contractor that's helping with our local CEDS, to see if again we can get on their list for the public rollout of that draft of the CEDS, because again, that's going to come a little bit sooner. It'll be finalized and then again forwarded up to the state to become part of the statewide CEDS. And finally, again, I do have right now again the new director of the State Geologic Survey. We mentioned critical minerals and that opportunity here in this presentation. And so to get an update regarding their work and again, meet the new director. So, all right, guys, if you have anything else you'd like me to start to try to run down, we got lots of stuff I'm trying to run down for you all's digestion and discussion. But if you have any recommendations, I'm always open to them. And I love the assistance. And with that, thanks a million, guys. Have a great rest of your day. Be sure to go to the CED website and take the survey.
Mm-hmm. Thanks,
All
everybody.
right.
Take care.
Thanks, Nolan.